In 2015, my wife Tracy and I decided we wanted to hike down into the Grand Canyon that summer. So we read up, did a little bit of research. We found out that the further in you go, the hotter it gets. It can be hot on the South Rim at the top, but it's only going to get hotter as you go down. So we prepared accordingly. We brought hiking boots. We brought big floppy hats. On the day, we brought lots of sunscreen lotion, packed some snacks, and brought tons of water. And so down we went. And we were rewarded for that preparation with magnificent views. Unbelievable. It's the greatest thing ever. It was hot, too. And the other thing you get when you do that is a tremendous workout based on the steepness of the trails. It was amazing. When we started our adventure, we immediately ran into this impressive young woman, a preventative search and rescue ranger. Essentially, she's a trailhead bouncer. Her job is to look at people and assess whether it's appropriate for them to do this adventure or not, whether they can do it. She's dedicated to the task, we talked to her briefly, to preserve human life and national park funds. Those are her two main things. Well, she gave Tracy and me a pass. She didn't interrupt us, and on we went for the trip that I had described that was pure bliss. We proceeded uninterrupted and had a great time. However, not everybody was so lucky. Others got interrupted, and they felt really unlucky. And I think maybe that interruption was the luckiest thing that ever happened to them. Why is that? Because flip-flops or Crocs and a 12-ounce bottle of Aquafina just were not gonna cut it. And so you should know that every year there are about 300 rescues performed in the Grand Canyon, and many of them are by helicopter. There's also 15 people that don't get rescued in time, 15 deaths every year on average, mainly from cardiac arrest, heart attacks. And so that's what the prevention is trying to prevent. If you look at the park's website, you see lots of things. You see the temperatures can be 100 near the top. It can get to be 100 in the summer. As you go down and you start to approach the floor, it can get to 120. You only have whatever water that you packed in. And it also challenges you. It says the difference between an excellent adventure in the canyon and a trip to the hospital is up to you. You get to decide which of those experiences you're gonna have. And I'm here to tell you that the interruptions I just discussed, the ones that are nice to not have, but the ones that are helpful sometimes too, that these are going to be coming faster, more frequently, longer in duration, in a variety of different forms, but particularly to the North American power grid. And that we, as security professionals, we need to first acknowledge this, and then we need to prepare ourselves to be able to be resilient personally, to be resilient in our organizations or the ones that we're trying to help. And once we've done that, once we've prepared ourselves, then we need to help others do the same. I'll invite you to please consider me for the next few minutes to be your preventative search and rescue ranger. I'm looking out at you like she was looking at us, curious about the dangers that we're not really paying attention to, we don't see coming, even if we're looking sometimes. And I posit that some of us have mental flip-flops or cognitive Crocs on, and that we sincerely need to update our figurative footwear and our thinking if we're going to be successful. In the early 2025, where we find ourselves right now, we're facing a 1-2 punch of digital and physical threats all around us. We're entering a new era. Some are calling the energy gauntlet. This is where you have rapidly rising demand for electricity on a creaky old grid with congested transmission arteries and relying more and more on generation that's coming from intermittent, variable, non-dispatchable inverter-based resources. And those resources having in their digital elements almost always components sourced from China. So all of that has to work all of that has to function in the golden age of ransomware, which I believe we're still in, and with environmental conditions that are just getting ever more challenging all the time and are guaranteed to get worse. I'll talk to you about the energy gauntlet a little bit in a few more minutes. But first, I know it's been part of this conference. Will generative AI be coming over the hill to save us from this extremely great challenge and the interruptions that we seem poised to be welcoming into our lives? From my experience with it and my colleagues, I don't think so. I wouldn't bet my life on it. I wouldn't bet your life on it. But interruptions aren't just coming in the future. They are hitting all the time around us now. Depending on where you live and what you do, they're arriving fast and furious. More coming. Public safety power shutoffs, the acronym PSPSs, are now becoming the norm in 10 US states and counting. And if you look outside, you'll start to see that starting to spread across the country. Pictured here is the fire in Los Angeles last month. From what I understand, PSPSs were attempted by the large utility serving the area, but whether they did it imperfectly, didn't de-energize, it's about de-energizing lines before they might go down and spark a fire. Whether they didn't do that in time or in all the right places or mistakes were made, there just may be some cases where it's just overwhelming and it doesn't matter whether you're doing a PSPS or not. Last October at NERC's annual security conference, Sunny Westcott, who's the chief meteorologist of the Department of Homeland Security, when she did her lunchtime keynote, she noted that at that moment she was on the stage talking, that there was a wildfire being fought in all 50 of the states. And that's in October, and that's all 50 of the states. And this isn't just happening in the United States, it's happening all over the place. I'll spiel off a few. England, France, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Australia. And then we can look across the Mediterranean, and we can look also to Central Europe and the Western Balkans and the Southern Hemisphere too. This is happening in all those places. It's obviously upending lives and businesses. It's also destroying electrical and other types of critical infrastructures as it makes its way across the planet. Then there's floods. Floods are happening increasingly, often on the heels of large storms. In 2024, we saw Beryl hit Houston and cause blackouts for some of the people that live there of over 2 weeks, living without electricity for 2 weeks. There was Hermine and Milton both coming into Florida, Hermine traveling to Asheville, a place that was a climate haven, and Milton, somewhat famously, I talked to Dale about it, there was a moment or two where Milton was coming right here, and this is where S4 was moved to. Fortunately for this conference and the city, it moved on a more southerly trajectory, unfortunately for the people that lived in its path. But Valencia, pictured here, this is in southeast Spain. Key detail is that they received 1 year of rain in 8 hours. 1 year of rain in 8 hours. I'm not a stormwater expert, but from talking with people who are, they will say there is no stormwater system in the world that's nearly prepared for that type of precipitation, and yet events like that are becoming more and more common. You can imagine Congress in the face of all these things, the digital threats and the physical threats to infrastructure, to business, et cetera, saying, hey, FERC, get on the ball. Your job to take care of this, fix these problems, make sure our grid is reliable. And you can imagine FERC looking over to the side and going, hey, NERC, why don't you fix these problems? That's sort of their relationship. Why don't you get together with the standards developers, fix these problems? And so then NERC's got the potato, the football. And so then NERC, what do? They got standards development teams made out of utilities and others. They say, hey, utilities, trade groups, fix this. Can't have this. Okay, so now I'm out there and I'm a utility and my standards group, my EEI, NREC, APPA, et cetera. And so what do? I look to my suppliers. Can we have equipment that can help us with this, better, different, more equipment that's reasonably priced and secure? And you know what else they do increasingly? Some of you may have experienced this. Yeah, your utility, and you're paying your bill, is saying, can you not use it right now? It's going to be hot. Can you not use your electricity quite as much? And that will help us. That will help us keep from losing it all. And so people generally try to. As we get used to these things, and they start happening more and more, we start to remember our lives that were uninterrupted or less interrupted. It starts to come on heavier. We're going to have some real emotional work to do as we process these things. Some will be announced, these interruptions, these outages. Some won't. Some will come as surprises. But the emotional work could involve going through stages of grief and loss. The one first reaction people often can have to something like this is denial. Nope, this isn't what's happening. I don't accept this, no. Then there are other phases, of course, that follow. Some people might just get stuck there. Maybe you know some people like this. But some people move on. It's a human process. They get to anger. Anger is good because it's energy, and you've got it. And so this is somebody's fault. Somebody's not doing their job. It's the government. It's definitely my utility. It's all my utilities. It's everybody. So I'm pissed off at them, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do about it. But I'm angry. Anyway, we eventually get through anger, and we get to a stage called depression. I really wish that this wasn't the way it is now, and I imagine it's going to keep being this way. Depression can feed into acceptance, which is a little bit mellower version of depression. All right, we'll sort of do this okay. And so you've got that acceptance, and so you're stuck there for a little bit. But then, some people in this room have the disposition that they don't want to be in any of those stages for too long. And they go into stage 5, which is called determination, embracing interruptions, the idea that things are interruptible regularly now, and moving out to create a stronger, more resilient future. That's what I imagine is the temperament of people that come to S4, and other people that don't come to S4. You know the old thing about look to the helpers when things get tough. We can leverage the fact, and this may not be intuitive to everybody, that when you accept and then embrace the idea of a more interruptible future, that there are some significant resilience benefits that come from this. Again, that seems probably a little bit weird, but they can make a very powerful combination. For me, I'm just a regular person. I'm not a deep subject matter and expert, but I get to work with people who are, and it's fantastic. And initially, when I was starting to process these thoughts, I could hear echoes of the work of colleagues that are working on CCE or CIE, cyber-informed engineering, people like Ginger Wright and Megan Culler, and some of our partners in the form of Andrew Ort, who taught a class on CCE 2 days ago, and Tony Turner, big CIE evangelists and trainers. So it sort of felt right to me. So I said that there is a way for these things to actually be helpful to us. I know I'm trying to make the connection that the people that got turned around on the trail and didn't die, they were lucky to be interrupted. Sometimes we're lucky to be interrupted once we can begin to process that. So 5 ways that these things can play nicely together is when you embrace an attitude, a strategy, a culture of interruptibility, you get flexibility out of that, which just basically means that when there's an interruption, when there's a disruption to business as usual, it doesn't always have to be a catastrophe. Sometimes it'll feel like a catastrophe for the people around you, but you don't have to feel that way. The fault tolerance part points to the fact that, well, we knew this was going to happen. We have systems and processes designed to fail gracefully so that we can either capture a, what am I trying to say here? That we can preserve our state that we're in, or we can roll back to a safe point. It's not a catastrophe. We are planning on this, right? Resource management is the idea that when you're working on something, and especially when you're trying to support critical functions, those pauses give you a chance to assess what's going on and reallocate precious resources, which is really a benefit when you get in the position where you're supporting critical function, like I said, reallocation of resources in the middle of the fight. The modularity part speaks to the fact that in a complex process, you probably have multiple different pieces of it that support each other, that feed each other. But if you're modular, you can have barriers separating components, separating pieces of this, so that a failure over here doesn't necessarily have to ripple across and bump into and cause cascades over there. That's another design consideration, like CIE's process and system design that speaks to this topic. And then lastly, adaptive capacity. Perhaps the very definition of resilience, the idea that when conditions change, and they're going to change, that you know that's coming. You've already thought about plan A, plan B, and plan C, and you adapt accordingly. And a lot of people don't even know that there was a hiccup. I posit that in the future, companies that are the most successful will be not just those that innovate on the best product or the best service, but they'll be ones that innovate the most rapidly on adaptation and resilience to this more interruptible future. You'll see them standing out when others are slower to move, slower to accept this new reality. Scene 1. There's scenes in the title of this presentation. Scene 1, I bring you to NERC hydro, a situation some of you are familiar with. And it's March of 2019. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, the CEO, who was really a new CEO and not technically the CEO at all, but she was the best thing they had at that point, she was called into the office and said, we have a crisis, please get in here, drive in. And so she did. Had to be there in person for the crisis, right? And the lesson that's going to be taught here in the next couple seconds is about adaptive capacity, or in this case, the lack of adaptive capacity. So it was a ransomware attack called Locker Gaga. It hit about 30,000 servers and PCs. They're in 150 different countries, this interesting Norwegian company that has big power from hydro, but also makes a lot of aluminum for the world. And from what I understand, the power generation part wasn't affected too badly. They were able to do some things more manual, and it wasn't as much of a crisis. But aluminum was screwed. And they had orders, and they didn't have orders anymore all of a sudden. One thing they had was this weird guy. Maybe he's a normal person, depends on your point of view. But allegedly, he didn't believe in computers. So his delusion allowed him to write down the week's orders longhand every week when the order came in. So he had a notebook with details of all the orders that his shop was going to be building that week. So that was one part of NERC's aluminum business that wasn't dead in the water. And they kind of looked at them as, wow, at least we're doing something in this crisis. They kept things flowing. Ultimately, though, this is a sad story for them. There's not a real big uplift here. They lost around $75 million from this experience, and they've pledged to be better in the future, to have better plans to adapt to things like this. Because really, ransomware, it's not really a surprise, right? I mean, it's a surprise when it happens to you, but it's not really a surprise that it's happening to you, because it's happening to everybody. This is Lahaina. This is the town that burned down in August 2023. It's on Maui. It's the same island Dale lives on, just a different part of it. The western side of the Hawaiian Islands tend to get dried out from the prevailing winds. And so just ahead of this fire, there were drought conditions. The vegetation was super dried out and ready to go. And a storm, it was hot, and a storm was projected to be coming just off of the coast. They didn't know how far, they didn't know what the impacts were going to be, but they understood there was going to be some potentially high winds, but there was some uncertainty to that. And so they sought to ride it out. It's interesting because this is 2023, right? They've had almost 10 years of lessons from California and Washington and Oregon and then Colorado and other places that have been proactive. I mean, they all had to get whacked first, because humans aren't generally proactive unless you make them suffer a lot first. So it's sort of a reactive proactivity. But they saw this happening on the mainland, and they didn't do anything. In fact, I talked to a commissioner from their Public Utility Commission shortly after Lahaina, and he said, you know, before that fire, we were all tracking volcanoes as the biggest threat to the grid. That was our #1 risk, was volcanoes. I don't know what that meant from a cybersecurity point of view. I didn't dig on that. But they weren't thinking about wildfires. And so they, so what happened on that day? The wind did blow, the lines went down, they weren't de-energized. There's videos of this. They sparked fires, and over 100 people died, and thousands of homes and buildings were wiped out, including the complete incineration of the Lahaina substation. As I always want you to remember, there's the infrastructure element to this, not just the human devastation, social and economic costs. The infrastructure we work so hard to protect is taking these hits as well. Lawsuits are still ongoing. The good news, they have good news at the end, which is in July 1st of last year, 2024, they stood up their public safety power shutoff program. And I was watching it. I was ready for the launch. They did a great job. If you go to their website, at HECO, the Hawaiian Electric Company, you'll see these guys are on the ball now. It took what it took in order to get them to that stage, you know? All right, the next thing is, where is that new demand in the energy gauntlet coming from? It's coming from data centers, it's coming from electric vehicles, it's coming from new manufacturing in the United States, it's coming from heat pumps and the electrification of everything. NERC's long-term reliability assessments are calling out that we don't have enough capacity. We've been shutting dispatchable generation down. We've been standing up intermittent generation, non-dispatchable. And that increasingly, we're going to see announcements in the spring that say, summer's going to be hard in these areas. We may have more blackouts. You see announcements in the fall that say, winter, if it's hard, is going to be difficult. We may have blackouts in these areas. They're foretelling rolling blackouts. And I'm not sure we're listening very closely to that. Not everybody, not most people perhaps. That's the long-term reliability assessment. Now we do have a way of making renewable energy, intermittent energy dispatchable, and it's called storage, bulk electric storage systems. And that's great if we do these things in scale. The problem is, as I mentioned, the Chinese componentry and the digital side of these things means that because you get the benefit of the dispatchability, the predictability of the electricity that's generated by wind or solar, and now you have a new cyber vulnerability you didn't have. The upside here is that super colleague Emma Stewart, who briefed on this yesterday with her Bessie, is hard at work helping us figure out ways to make these things as safe as they possibly could be, safe and secure as they could be. I'm going to be going a little faster now. Scene 3. This is a lesson in preparedness and fault tolerance. A grocery store 2,000, a chain grocery store had 2,000 stores. Last year, the dashboard of the emergency manager, an SVP emergency manager, lit up red in the Pacific Northwest. A derecho had hit. Derechos, if you don't know, are like strange hurricanes that are unpredictable, and the wind comes down and sometimes sideways. They blow over trees, which land on lines, which land on the ground in houses and buildings. And then they also open circuit breakers as they're doing this. And this guy saw that all of a sudden that this large chain had 40 stores that were off the grid, out of power. And so that was a crisis. 40 were done. Now, when this happens to these stores, they have to do a couple things. They do have a small generator on site that they learned to do that can power backup lighting and the point of sale systems. Because grocery stores, as we learned in COVID, are critical infrastructure. You've got to keep these things going. So they have a way of doing that. You can't let people go down these freezer and fridge aisles, though, because if they open those doors, you start to get into a spoilage situation. They can't have that. Financially devastating. It's not good for the supplies, the food either. And this emergency manager has been sharing that power outages, when the board and with the other executives, are their #1 risk that they've been tracking the last couple of years. So they've been training the store managers to be mini emergency managers. And so when these things happen at those 40 stores, they are able to get through it, stay in business in a limited, resilient way until the real power came back up, which it did. But perhaps you've seen this if you've ever been in a blackout area, that you are not allowed to go down those cold aisles. The last scene is one that I bet many of you are familiar with. We're talking about Colonial Pipeline and the ransomware that hit them in May of 2021. They were asked for $4 million in Bitcoin to restore. They worked that angle. They were working other angles at restoration. But check this out. When this appeared on a screen, something like this, early in the morning, within an hour and 15 minutes, CEO Joe Blount said, stop it, stop everything, stop the flow. And they did. And Tim Conway, who some of you will know from SANS and other places, he said to me when I asked him about it, there's no way they could have acted that fast unless they had planned for this. It's not just something you can just suddenly do. The impacts were immediate and alarming. Almost half of the eastern seaboard gets its fuels via this pipeline. One analyst said, in commentary said, this is as close as you can get to the jugular of critical infrastructure in the United States. It's not just a major pipeline, it's the pipeline. And this is what we were dealing with recently. So they were trying to restore, and they were also trying to do OT cyber forensics. Because what seems to be an attack on IT and brick systems there could be a smokescreen cover into OT. And to allow uncertainty and someone potentially in the OT networks who could drive pumps and compressors to destruction, long lead time to repair equipment, that's just unacceptable. So they stopped until they had enough confidence, probably not perfect confidence, but enough, so that in 6 days, they were able to give there's the pipeline. In 6 days, this guy was able to be on the TV and say it's back online. The difference between a 6-day interruption, which was surprising but survivable, and a 6-month outage if heavy-duty equipment was destroyed, that would just be, we'd be living in a completely different universe if that's what had happened. We'd still be feeling the ripple effects of that. I'm going to end with something that is not the last slide, but because of time, I'm going to end. We have increasingly calls from cyber experts to do cyber version of PSPSs. So PSPSs is when you think you have wildfire risk. But a cyber version is when there's a reasonably good chance you don't own your OT, that you might seriously consider stopping what you're doing, stopping the flow of electricity or fuel, stopping the manufacturer of important widgets. And you'll do that, and it'll anger people because the risk of continuing to operate and potentially losing everything for a long time is simply too great. And so that would be a type of interruption on both sides that would be vastly preferable, the short-term thing, to the longer term. Digital PSs, if you will. We'll see if that becomes normal. I do say that we are all creators, we are all defenders of the future. Dale's slogan, create the future, we're also at the same time defending it. And no matter what your role is, the metrics by which we're measured are still safety, security, and reliability. You stir in the energy gauntlet, you stir in generative AI in these ever-worsening conditions, and we must prepare ourselves. We must prepare ourselves first for these conditions, and when we're done and when we're ready, we have to help others do the same. Thank you very much.